I think that I've fallen.
Okay, so the last one I actually want to check out is actually about Final Fantasy. I am a WoW player. Did you know this? You didn't. Well, too bad. But wait, just give me a second. Mm-mm-mm. Okay. But I'm curious about the Yoshi-P effects. Yoshi-P is the basically like the lead game designer for Final Fantasy Online. And everyone praise him for like good reasons. The dude is absolutely a sweetheart, apparently. And some dude actually like takes the time to do a critique about this character because he's really active.
I think that I've fallen out of love with Final.
He is really so Yoshi-P is basically like the main game designer when it comes to Final Fantasy Online, right? The MMORPG. And the thing is that like I don't know, but what I know is that like he is really active within the community and absolutely adulated. He's absolutely loved by the community. So, but I don't know much more than that. That like people fucking love him. And there's this dude. The problem with Yoshi-P, I know this critique. Like I want to know more about like Yoshi-P in general and who is like I don't know. Um and yeah, and I want to know what is the actual opinion of someone who actually loves Yoshi-P, loves the Final Fantasy, what it's like. I'm just curious of this character because it is rare. It kind of makes me think about like someone like Gab Newell when it comes to Steam. You know, like it reminds me of someone like Gabe Newell from Steam. So I want to know. I'm curious. So let's check this out.
Final Fantasy XIV. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is going to be another video essay about how terrible Dawn Trail is, right? No, not exactly, because my moment of realization wasn't in the middle of a cooking competition with Wukla Mod. As a matter of fact, it wasn't even while I was playing Final Fantasy XIV. It was while I was playing Final Fantasy XVI that the spell finally broke. I want to make one thing clear. I'm a normal guy, I have a normal job, a budding independent business, a couple of dogs. I don't have a ton of time to play video games, let alone make videos for this channel. Thus, in order to avoid wasting my limited time, I don't buy games that I don't scrutinize heavily first, and I certainly don't appreciate when games disrespect what little time I have. Final Fantasy XVI was one of the few games that I've ever purchased on faith alone. Faith that was founded in my experience with Final Fantasy XIV, which at the time of 16's release, I would have considered both the best MMORPG on the market and the best narrative in a video game. I know, that's a bold claim, but Shadowbringers was really that good. For those of you who are uninitiated, 14 and 16 are both products of Creative Studio 3, or as it was once called, Creative Business Unit 3, so it shouldn't come as a surprise to any of you that the two games bear more than a few similarities. In fact, they're alarmingly similar in almost every way outside of fidelity, and of course one being an MMORPG and the other being a single-player game. I'll be blunt, Final Fantasy XVI kinda sucked. I acknowledge that the visuals are gorgeous and that the music is wonderful, even if it is just Eureka, and the boss encounters had the budget of a small country's gross domestic product, but the game itself kinda sucked. 16's world was barren, uninteresting to explore, and entirely devoid of danger. The most threatening thing awaiting you in 16 is the laundry list of uninspired side quests that offer neither an intrinsic gameplay experience worth having, nor an extrinsic reward worth suffering for. Its combat appears intensive, but it masks its shallow systems behind overwrought visuals to keep you from realizing that the enemies you've been fighting haven't swung their weapons in about 6 or 7 seconds. 16 even has the gall to present the player with a crafting system which offers statistical upgrades in order to create the illusion of progression and customization, but the system exists to fulfill a feature quota rather than being something interesting to interact with. Does any of that sound familiar to you? What other game might that list of flaws also describe? I just can't put my finger on it. If you guessed Final Fantasy XIV, then congratulations, you've been paying attention, and you've won today's special prize. Please collect a free copy of a good MMO on your way out. In my mind, the developers of my favorite MMORPG would surely create a masterpiece with all of the financial backing of Square Enix and a full-length AAA development cycle, yet the result of that effort was one of the most restrained, lifeless, and quite frankly boring games I've ever played. So, who's at fault? Hence the title. I know, everybody loves Yoshi-P, and you're already upset that I would even suggest that his stewardship of these two Final Fantasy entries has been anything less than stellar, but you have to agree that if there's an issue, then the buck has to stop somewhere, and what better place than with the director? So hold off on disliking the video just yet. Let me make my case, then you can dislike it. Let's talk about the culture of fear that defines Creative Studio 3's game design philosophy. A few years ago, NoClip released a documentary about Final Fantasy XIV's disastrous launch and its eventual recovery from the brink with the leadership of Naoki Yoshida. You've all seen it. I'd even wager that some of you who are watching this in front of a live audience right now shamelessly re-uploaded it to your channels. It was an inspiring story of determination, unbridled passion, and draconian micromanagement, which led to the development of one of the most successful MMORPGs ever made. When I watched it, however, I was struck by one particular scene during Yoshida's interview. I will paraphrase. Basically, Yoshi-P claimed to have implemented a system of task micromanagement which tracked an individual employee's job down to the minute. You can imagine that such a system would be necessary when attempting to rebuild an MMO in 18 months. The results, of course, speak for themselves, but I could never let go of that quote. Why would anyone want to work under those conditions? Well, thank goodness they aren't doing that anymore.
Yeah, but like if you implement it in an MMO, like the thing is that like MMORPG role-playing games, it's not a fucking 9 to 5, a dead-end job. Like you're not fucking like scheduled in a fucking like office or restaurant or fucking like factory to fucking like work. You are like, you have like a schedule for being a hero in a fantastic world. So this is a good thing if you're scheduled. I would love to be scheduled as a fantastic hero in a fantasy world. I wouldn't mind
Anymore. But do we know that? Are we sure that Yoshi-P has loosened his grip in the last 10 years that he's helmed Square Enix's flagship live service game? While I would assume that working conditions have changed at the studio, only the people on the inside can say for certain. Either way, I can't shake the feeling that the specter of those grueling 18 months is hanging over Creative Studio 3 to this day, despite all of its success, dictating how they make video games. Consider the way that both 14 and 16 treat their own combat systems. No one would disagree that both of these titles are narrative driven, but there is a sense that Creative Studio 3 is ashamed of the fact that they have to interrupt their storytelling with obligatory combat encounters. 14 is an absurdly easy game in nearly every respect, sequestering its truly difficult content as far away from players as possible in order to ensure that story progression cannot be impeded by gameplay. To experience 14's current Savage tier, one has to play through over 200 hours of story, which is composed almost entirely of stinted cutscenes with sparse gameplay along the way. What gameplay challenges do exist are nearly impossible to fail, which makes them feel trivial and unrewarding. This is a problem that persists into the level cap. During Endwalker's 6.2 patch cycle, Yoshida himself talked about falling asleep during an expert dungeon, an experience that I've had throughout Dawntrail and Final Fantasy XVI. Despite boasting a combat system built in part by Ryota Suzuki, who led the design of the combat in Devil May Cry 5, 16's gameplay is similarly toothless. The general difficulty is extremely low, with enemies of every variety, from your standard spider in a forest to an S-rank hump mark, offering little to no threat throughout the course of the campaign, which, by the way, must be completed in order to access Final Fantasy mode, which increases the difficulty to a more acceptable level. Again, push the good stuff as far away as possible. Funny enough, you can actually decrease 16's difficulty further by wearing the timely rings, which trivialize combat mechanisms such as using Torgal's abilities or dodging enemy attacks or even performing combos. These accessories are optional, of course, but they're emblematic of Creative Studio 3's fear that a player will be unable to overcome a gameplay challenge and, as a result, miss the opportunity to experience the next cutscene. Thus, they build their games to be nearly impossible to fail, smoothing out the rough textures that make playing video games interesting, and then they hide any semblance of challenge as far out of view as possible out of fear that you might be scared off, all in service of storytelling.
I'm Wutlamat, claimant to the throne of Tulihuela.
What I'm about to say applies exclusively to 14. Creative Studio 3 demonstrates more of that paralyzing fear of failure in the delivery of its content offerings. Expansions are a strict template upon which an identical experience is built. By refusing to innovate or to introduce new kinds of content or to even reinvent dated systems, Creative Studio 3 successfully evades any possible crisis while also circumventing all potential to provide their paying customers with interesting experiences. Unless they're building a mobile game, of course. In that case, pull out all the stops. The worlds that Creative Studio 3 creates are always beautifully rendered, yet painfully constrained and completely lacking in any sense of danger or discovery. As I began my journey with 16, I immediately recognized the map design as identical to 14's, which gave me some pause because it reminded me specifically of A Realm Reborn. Consider the marshes just south of Martha's Rest. There were moments when traversing the environment and I would see an objective across a river, but because of the restrictive map design, I would be unable to reach it without taking an unnatural detour. It felt completely unintuitive to have to circumnavigate terrain which appeared traversable. Then I remembered that as a hallmark of 14's early world design. One of the first negative impressions I had of Final Fantasy XIV was when I realized how segmented Limsa Lominsa was, not to mention the rest of the areas in which A Realm Reborn takes place. The world provides the illusion of a playable space, but the map reveals how small that space truly is. Ultimately, I forgave the game for this flaw, chalking it up to the technical limitations of the PlayStation 3, but when I laid eyes on this, I began to wonder whether or not technical limitations were the culprit after all. What is the reason to continue designing playable environments in this way? And what is the purpose of populating these spaces with enemies that pose absolutely no threat to any player who has the capacity to mash square? Some of the most memorable moments that I've ever had in the entirety of my life playing video games have been a result of emergent gameplay. I recently had an amazing encounter with this while playing Throne and Liberty. I was exploring an environment, then I ran into an unexpected combat encounter which led to an hour-long grind session with total strangers. You'll hear more about that game in my next upload, but those types of experiences in which the player engages with the game's systems and environments to create an unexpected outcome are completely missing in Creative Studio 3's games. This is a result of two design choices. First, as I mentioned before, the lack of threats in the open world. In both 14 and 16, barring exceptional circumstances, the game is working overtime to ensure that you are never in danger while you are moving towards your next objective in the narrative. In particular, 16 has an issue with allowing the player to severely outscale the creatures in the open world, while also making it impossible for them to dismount or interrupt player movement. So you barely have to consider their existence as you run past them. If the player does decide to engage them, then the enemies usually spend most of the fight standing still, allowing you to ruin them with the same combo that you've performed hundreds of times before. 14 is similarly bland in this respect, with the exception of S-rank hunt marks, which boast unique and deadly attacks. However, those marks are typically engaged by organized hunt trains, whose sheer numbers completely trivialize the danger of those encounters. And second, the lack of discoverability in the open world. Throughout both games, 14 and 16 boast beautiful worlds which serve as nothing more than set dressing for their respective narratives. There are no hidden treasures behind waterfalls, there are no destroyable barrels with crucial consumables, and there are certainly no secrets to uncover of any kind. Creative Studio 3's world design trains the player to pay as little attention to it as possible, never having to consider his or her options against a dangerous threat, never wondering if there might be something worthwhile to discover off the beaten path. Everything exists in service to the narrative, so as long as the world looks pretty and it stays out of the way of the finely crafted cutscenes, then it's a thumbs up from Yoshi-P. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I'm a busy guy. One night following a 12
So this is what I understand, is that basically like the influence of Yoshi-P is something that actually ruined the pacing and the storytelling of other Final Fantasy games. And I didn't knew that like it was this much of a problem that that you were like pushed into this type of just like linear content without like having the chance to go explore the world and find something interesting in it. This is interesting. This is really interesting.
Hour workday, I decided to sit down and play Final Fantasy 16. I gave myself about an hour of gameplay before I would get ready for bed. In that hour, I touched my controller twice, maybe? The session was mostly cutscenes, all fantastically performed, but cutscenes nonetheless. I remember putting my controller down and going to bed having done virtually nothing in that session. Then
yeah, but at the same time, not to be a bitch to this creator, because I know that like he is passionate about Final Fantasy. I never took the time to discover this world. I will take the time to discover this world maybe someday, but it is an experience that you know that you are getting into when you buy a Final Fantasy game. So you should not like. I think that like it's unfair to complain about the fact that you get a lot of cutscenes in from a game developer that for the longest time has been like creating games that are focused on narrative. You cannot blame the gaming industry that of your own choice, while the game designers and the game that you choose are known for being for being focused and uh loving to create strong narratives through cutscenes. Like, this is unfair. I think that, like, this is an unfair critique, you know?
And I came back the next night, and guess what? The same thing. More cutscenes and almost no gameplay. I began to notice a pattern, which I realized had started as far back as my introduction to Final Fantasy XIV, almost 6 years prior. Creative Studio 3 has a terrible habit of stripping away the player's agency in the story that they're so desperate to tell. At every turn in both 14 and 16, control is ripped out of your hands, turning you into a passive observer rather than an active participant in the game. This game design habit has only worsened in 14 with the release of Dawntrail. Attempting to play through the expansion story in 1 or 2 hour intervals like any regular person with a regular schedule was torture. Like off-the-books CIA black site torture. The only conclusion that I can reasonably come to is that no one at Creative Studio 3 plays their own games the way that we play them. Now, I am well aware that Yoshi-P is famously active in Final Fantasy XIV, but what I'm questioning here is whether or not anyone at that studio, particularly its vaunted director, has ever sat down to play through their game's stories in a single, uninterrupted session. If they had, then
And this is also like an unfair critique, because this is Final Fantasy games are known for being really, really, really dense and really, really rich in content. You do not fucking finish a Final Fantasy game in one setting, in one setting, in one playthrough. You cannot fucking do that. So why would you complain about that? This is their selling points. That these are like long story driven games. I think I understand these critiques, but at the same time, it's really like it makes me like it makes me think, it makes me feel that like it's kind of like me buying Call of Duty and being like, yeah, it's no me buying downloading Valorant and being like, yeah, the superior, like the hero themes and the fast pacing. Do they play their own games, you know? And I think that, like, and it's just that's the selling point. That is fast paced. That there are like hero powers. And I think that's why his critique is really unfair, because it's this is basically like why you buy a Final Fantasy game, not like, and I think it's obvious to everyone, you know.
maybe someone might have noticed how often their games insist on playing themselves for fear of the player's input sullying the experience. These games are not visual novels, at least ostensibly. However, they certainly do function like visual novels, interrupted by brief spurts of well-dressed yet paper-thin gameplay. Under Yoshi-P's leadership, Creative Studio 3 is inviting less participation from players as the years go on. Both 14's recent expansion and
Yeah, so what is Source is a game that is not Final Fantasy. It's a game that allows them to interact more. Because like these games have been running for years, decades already. Like if it's not what drives you and what interests you, because for me, for example, to me it's not my thing. But if it doesn't drive you anymore, it's fine. But it's not the fault of the game developer. It's because you change, because you this dude changed his mind, and I'm guessing it's sad that like it doesn't get the experience that he searched for in his favorite game. And I respect, and I don't think that it's stupid what he says. I just think that like it should allow himself to um to broaden his horizon and to try something else that allows him to get what he wants.
16 go to great lengths to tell you what happened in the story rather than showing you or even allowing you to interact.
But I will tell you one thing that like I will completely agree with one thing, is that nostalgia is a bitch, and when it's your favorite game, it's really hard to detach. And so it's I'm never I really don't want to be mean or anything. I completely understand that it comes from like feeling like it comes from this dude is love this game, is and is just disappointed with it, and he's sad about it, you know. And it doesn't make him someone stupid or just like it's not some like unworthy unjustified like insult, or like just like w- like just whining about a game. It's just a dude that like I think like noticed that like his favorite game is doesn't brings him the things that he searches when it comes to gameplay. And because of that he doesn't he cannot fucking like get he doesn't want to fucking abandon it, but at the same time he cannot fucking do it anymore. Maybe he should take a break. Maybe he should see that like there are like so many games worse than Final Fantasy, and maybe come back later, you know. Maybe allow himself some time to just like re-enjoy what made him enjoy Final Fantasy the first time by doing something else, you know.
With the events yourself. For example, in Dawntrail, we weren't allowed to participate in the cooking contest, the rebuilding of the train in Shalawani, or the invasion of Tuliyola. All of those critical events in the story were cutscenes. 16 is guilty of this too, with the most egregious example being the boat chase towards the end of the game. It would have been a lot of fun to pilot this boat myself, dodging enemy attacks before ramming into their ship and boarding it. But no, the cutscenes ate up all the budget, so all you get to do is perform the same combo you already have throughout the game against enemies who will barely try to kill you. I really struggle to think of another studio in the AAA space that demonstrates as much disdain for player agency as Creative Studio 3. More than simply committing the sin of ignoring show don't tell as a rule of storytelling, this is a studio which frequently asks its players to stay on the sideline of the experience that they paid for. This is a studio that fancies itself a great producer of stories, but stories can exist outside of the strict parameters laid down by the game developer. That's the beauty of video.
Maybe in the future they will offer more leisure, because thankfully Final Fantasy is a MMORPG, so it's constantly updated. Maybe in the future, but at the same time, yeah.
Video games. Emergent gameplay is as important to a game's narrative as its writing and its vocal performances. I think that Creative Studio 3 has completely lost sight of that. As an extension of the issues with player agency that plague Final Fantasy 14 and 16, there's a grand illusion obscuring one of the most unsightly blemishes on the face of Creative Studio 3, the illusion of choice. This is specifically in reference to customization and progression, which are abysmal in both of the titles that have been produced by this studio. Just a few weeks before producing this video, I managed to earn my best in slot gear in Final Fantasy 14 as a Viper. As a result of earning this achievement after months of raiding, I felt absolutely nothing. Similarly, in 16, every time I would forge a stronger weapon or piece of armor or accessory, I would feel absolutely nothing. Creative Studio 3's approach to customization and progression is to simply avoid the topic altogether. Outside of numerical adjustments, improving your equipment in both 14 and 16 is an exercise in boredom. In 16, crafting materials are given to players like government cheese, a paltry handout to keep you moving along the singular track that has been determined for you. In 14, gear is entirely lacking in variety, and the process of selecting your gear is trivialized by the push of a button which determines your best gear for you. Any need for input or weighing of options or opportunity cost has been sanded down or completely discarded. These progression systems exist as a means to fulfill some kind of design quota, as if someone said, well, we're building a video game, so we need to have a crafting system and gear progression, but we'd much rather add another pointless side quest with 7 minutes of dialogue, so just slap something together and call it a day. For an MMO to have a gearing system this weak is frankly unbelievable. I have never, not once, felt excited about what gear does in 14, only what it looks like. But for a single-player, story-driven role-playing game without the weight of multiplayer balance and technical debt to feel just as bland, just as phoned in, and quite frankly just as boring, is equally dumbfounding. Isolated from their other design flaws, Creative Studio 3's inability to create an interesting progression system in over a decade of game development might be excusable, but it goes back to the heart of the issue. Whether or not these are directly his decisions, Creative Studio 3's design philosophy under the leadership of Yoshi-P seems interested only in eroding what little input is left in the hands of the players. The final point of contention that I want to talk about is Creative Studio 3's quest design, or lack thereof. In the MMORPG genre, quests are a bit of a conundrum because they typically boil down to talking to an NPC, clicking on an interactable item, or killing a group of enemies, but that isn't necessary by its nature. When we talk about quest design in MMOs, we treat it as though it's a solved problem, as if that's the extent of what the genre is capable of, but quests can be more than the linear processes that we become accustomed to. Creative Studio 3 demonstrated a willingness to push the boundaries of these dated assumptions about quest design during Endwalker. They gave us a sort of Metal Gear Solid mission and a timed puzzle to contend with, which proved to me that the idea of the quest can still be a platform for innovation. What happened to that studio? Unfortunately, 16 and Dawntrail were a regression in this regard, resting on the laurels of the most basic form of quest design that you can think of. Go over there, deliver this thing to that guy, kill this bug. Yes, the fate of the world is at stake, but I really need you to help me pick these herbs. Creative Studio 3's games lean heavily on the dialogue as the experience of their quests, rather than the given task of the quest. This is an assumption, but it seems to me that the developers are confident that the intrinsic value of their quest design is more than enough for their players. The gameplay experience, or the prize at the other end of the quest, are an afterthought. In some cases, they're right. The story has the capacity to be more than enough. When I think of the most memorable moments during Shadowbringers, for example, I don't think of gameplay experiences. Rather, I think of the laundry list of incredible story beats that line that expansion story from start to finish. In that particular case, the intrinsic value covered the cost of admission. But when the story isn't as strong, then the gameplay better be damned good, or at least have the wherewithal to give me something I care about for sitting through your boring dialogue. But the reality is, that's an impossible thing to ask for. Yoshi-P's vision for Creative Studio 3 requires that their games are completely devoid of tension, threat, or input by the player, out of fear that their game's true reward, which is the next.
I think this is the part where like it just demonizes the game itself. I think it's not true. I think that I know that game design, especially when in studios that are so big, is a complicated process, and it's not that it's impossible. It's something that might or might not change, but it doesn't depend on one person, and it doesn't depend on it depends on many, and this many people, like, they still need to fucking like keep a game running, and they have the numbers showing what game runs, what works, what doesn't. But at the same time, like, I think that like demonizing the game and telling yourself like it's impossible that like it will be better again, like it's actually doesn't bring anything to the conversation. You don't know, no one knows. Like maybe, like, but why not choose optimism rather than pessimism in cases like this, you know?
Next cutscene will go unseen. To that end, their worlds must be built as set dressing for the story rather than spaces in which emergent gameplay can take place. Traditional progression systems threaten the delicate balance of their game, so they must be reduced to linear statistical advantages, lest they overwhelm the player with having to make a choice. And because the player cannot be reliably trusted to participate in a theatrical scene exactly as the developers envisioned it, they're forced to wrest control away from the player over and over again.
And I will tell you, in WoW, it's World of Warcraft. It's actually the opposite, where some people complain that we actually become a part of the theatrical scene too often. Like, so it really depends. But like, I think that like choosing optimism rather than pessimism and demonization is something that people should do more often, because like at the end of the day, like, life is not as depressing as people fucking tend to describe it, and but always staying within this like aura of pessimism, an aura of critique that like things will is they're set in stone and it will never be better or whatever. This is what actually manifest these type of these type of events. The fact that people stay in this negative mindset all the time, it's instead of being optimistic and simply trying to create a beautiful change within the life of others, rather than being like, yeah, this is done and fuck it, and might as well fucking not enjoy it and fucking be mean about it. Well, you can accept the truth that the truth is not always beautiful, that the truth is not always what you want, but that the truth can be changed if you don't choose to fucking like to legitimize it by being pessimistic about it, by being mean about it, by being uh by by being so discontent about it. Try to find another way. Try to find a way through optimism.
To ensure that the gameplay doesn't get in the way of the narrative, which, as you know, is the most important part of a video game. I understand that for many of you, Yoshi-P is something of a primal. People become incredibly emotional when you have anything negative to say about the products that he stewards, but remember, Naoki Yoshida works for a company. He's at the helm of an organization which creates products which you pay for. Some of you have given...
And this is something that like actually Yoshi-P does. Like you're talking about positivity and negativity, right? Being pessimistic and optimistic. Well, Yoshi-P, what does he do? And what I never played Final Fantasy. The only thing that I know is that he pushes the community to be better by being joyful, by being like optimistic, by being like happy, you know, by sharing this happiness with others, and not this fucking like not this fucking like uh not this fucking contagious like negativity and criticism and fucking like fuck that. Like be more positive about things, and you'll see that like even if it sounds impossible, you might, because if you choose to be the positive, choose optimism and altruism, and actually to instead of like doing a critique of something, but instead bringing solutions, with was changing the tone of of actually not talking about a critique, but talking about something that like could be better, something that may be improved. Well, you know what? Sometimes you might just be the change that you might just be enough to create this change. It happened before. It happened before in video gaming, in history, in a lot of things. So be the change that you want to see in the world. You know?
thousands of dollars to Square Enix for continued access to Final Fantasy XIV. It's my opinion that for the money you've spent, you deserve better, although whether or not you agree with that is up to you. Yoshi-P and the hundreds of faceless employees who work at Creative Studio 3 are not your friends. You have a transactional relationship with that studio's publisher and the games they produce. If you're happy with the slop that you've been served by Creative Studio 3 since the release of 16 and Dawntrail, then all power to you. For those of you who are a bit more sympathetic to my critiques, do as I've done. Vote with your wallet. Well, everybody, that is the end of that scathing essay. I'm looking forward to the public's reception of it.
To be fair, I've been maybe mean to this guy, but I will tell you that this man is not someone that I dislike. Is not your usual fucking like rage baiter and like type of person. He's just an emotional dude that fell in love with Final Fantasy and that saw Final Fantasy change, or he changed, you know? And now I cannot play it anymore because it doesn't make him feel happy the way it did. And even if it didn't say it, this is actually like the real the the person that the type of person that is like doing this critique, not someone that is just raging and like crying about it, like just being mean about like stuff and vulgar about. No, it's just a man that like lost his safe space, his place of fantasy, his place his place of like adventures, and he's sad about it, and I respect that. I just think that like even though it's difficult, you must choose to be optimistic. Choose optimism, because what else can you fucking do with like pessimism? You know? Well, you can actually like get views on YouTube. Yeah, you can actually like fucking like do some stuff, but is that really worth it? You know? Like